Camshafts, cylinder heads, or intake manifolds, which one adds the most power on your LS? Hello everybody, Armature Holder, and before we get into which one makes more power, camshafts or cylinder heads or intake upgrades on your LS, please welcome to the channel. The question is, which one makes more power? Should I upgrade a camshaft on my LS? Should I upgrade cylinder heads on my LS? Should I upgrade an intake manifold? And more importantly, how much power is each one of those modifications actually worth? Well, you're in luck. There's a guy out there who does testing all the time and knows exactly how much they're worth, so let's check it out. Okay, guys, we're going to take a look and see which one is worth more power, or at least how much power each one of these individual things gains. We're going to take a look at camshaft, cylinder head, and intake manifold on an LS. So which one should you be focusing your attention on the LS? We're going to start off with camshafts here on a 408 stroker. This particular 408 stroker included a scat 4-inch stroker crank, a forged crank. We had forged rods, we had forged 10cc dish pistons. This thing was equipped with a good set of cylinder heads because we wanted to have enough head flow, obviously, to take advantage of whatever these camshafts would have to offer. So we had a set of Airflow Research 245 heads. Topping off the 245 Airflow Research heads was a fast LSXR, LSXRT kind of intake manifold, 102mm throttle body. We had 1 7/8" headers. You can see we had injectors large enough to, in the Holley HP management system, so we could dial everything in, but injectors large enough to feed the combination. I believe that these were Holley 50-pound injectors. And so we had a combination that basically was looking for more camshaft, kind of the way that a factory one does, except more. As we had more displacement, more head flow, more intake flow. We had more of everything. So not surprisingly, the gains that we get from a camshaft are going to be fairly dramatic, but this is a good example. So we started off with the factory LM7 camshaft because that's the smallest factory camshaft available, and we ran that in our 408 and then essentially put the right camshaft in it, and I've got steps in between where we ran different kinds of camshafts so you can kind of see where they go. But a camshaft is worth as much as 175 horsepower, as we'll see here. So with our stock LM7 camshaft, 449 horsepower and lots more torque than that, 522 foot-pounds of torque. And here's what happened when we added a crane camshaft. And I'll go ahead and give you the specs on the crane camshaft. So the crane was 600 lift, a 240, 246 degree duration split, and 114 degree lobe separation angle. And that's opposed to the 190, 190 to 191 degree split that you use on the stock camshaft. You could see our peak power went from 449 up to 625. Peak torque went from 522 up to 579 or 580 foot-pounds of torque. The stock cam made a little bit more power than the bigger cam did, up to about 4,000, although not dramatically so. And then we gained a ton of power, you could see at the top, with the right kind of camshaft. Interestingly enough, if we take a look at this, we see we ran a small, like 206 cam, and it jumped power up a lot, 514 horsepower versus 449. And then we ran a 224 cam, just to give you an idea. These are kind of like all in the middle here. The 224 cam obviously didn't do as well as the 240 cam, but 584 horsepower, it still did pretty well, 566 foot-pounds of torque. So if you have a camshaft that's in between all of these, you can kind of notch it in there and kind of see where it would be. But for an LS application, especially one where we've upgraded things even further with more head flow from these Airflow Research 245 heads and more intake flow in the case of the fast intake manifold and more displacement, when we have more of everything, the camshaft is going to be an even bigger, greater gain than it would be on a stock motor. But let's check out and see how much power we get like from a cylinder head change on an LS. Okay guys, we've taken a look and see how much camshafts can be worth Now, they're not normally worth that much, but it's not unusual on an LS for a camshaft to be worth 50, 60, 70, even as much as 100 horsepower if you're comparing it to the stock LM7 camshaft on what we would call a more normal LS. But how much are cylinder heads worth? And I've run lots and lots of cylinder head tests. Please take a look at the cathedral port cylinder head test that I've done, and the LS3 head test that I've done, and the LS7 head test videos that I've done. So you can take a look at all those and kind of see what they're worth. But here is a pretty good example of what cylinder heads can be worth on a combination, and I've included this one because this is one that I recently found on a set of cylinder heads that I didn't think that I ever ran, but I actually did. And I'm talking about a set of 853 early LS1 heads. I didn't think that I had ever run these. Most of the ones that I run were 241s, but when you go back and look through the data and go, oh, look, and I was only able to find this out because I also took a look at the photos for the story that I did way back, and I'm like, hey, look, those are not 241s, but they did the same thing because they have the same configuration, same chamber size and valve size and all of that, so they flowed the same. But I was excited about that, and this is one of the tests also that kind of happened by accident because I was comparing something else, but we had what I would call a baseline configuration because I was doing that with a different test, and then we ended up upgrading it, and you'll see what I'm talking about here. So we have a stroker, a 415-inch, basically an LS3 stroker. It was an LS3 block. We had a scat forged crank, a 4-inch crank. We had CP bullet rods and pistons in it, 10cc dish on the pistons. We first equipped this thing with a set of the 853 out of the box stock LS1 heads. We had a pretty good sized camshaft in it. It was a Brian Tooley Racing Stage 4 LS3 cam, so it was a 630, 615 lift, a 233, 250 degree duration, and 113 plus 5 LSA. We had a set of their 650 or 660, I think they were platinum springs, so that we had enough spring for the 630 lift, especially on the intake side. And we ran this with a fast cathedral port intake manifold, 102 millimeter throttle body, 1 7/8 headers. And when we're putting the LS3 stuff on, the LS3 also got a fast intake manifold, same throttle body, same headers, all that stuff was the same. And we ran stock rockers on both of these, so they were 1.7s. We used a Holley HP management system and ran it the way that we always do with a Mazir electric water pump and stuff. So this test was run, as I said, because we were doing other testing with different kinds of cylinder heads on the stroker motor with different camshafts and stuff. And then we eventually stepped up to a set of MAST LS3 heads. So you can see the difference here. Pretty good gain in power from the head change. So run with our 853 LS1 heads, 547 horsepower. And 517 foot-pounds of torque. So stroker did pretty good. 415 stroker did pretty good. Here's what happened when we put our MAST LS3 heads on. And as I said, when we put the MAST LS3 heads on, it also got a fast intake manifold. But quite honestly, whether we'd run a fast intake manifold or just put the stock LS3 manifold on, we just haven't seen much of a change there. But since people get focused on, oh, you got to do apples to apples, even though we're completely changing the type of cylinder head, the port configuration, and then the attending intake manifold that we'd have to run. But, so this is a fast kind of thing. But the MAST heads picked up a lot of power on this combination. So we went from 547 horsepower up to 637 horsepower, so 90 horsepower. So that was a pretty good gain, and this is the kind of thing that we've seen. The kind of gain that you're going to get from cylinder heads is definitely a function of your test motor. And we saw this if you take a look at the head changes that we did and the head videos that we did on the cathedral port stuff, and then on the LS3 and then on the LS7, you have to have a lot of motor basically to be able to take advantage of what a cylinder head like this has to flow. I'm sure that these MAST heads flowed 350 or more CFM. So they've got enough to support probably another 100 horsepower on top of this. We just didn't have enough motor to really take advantage of everything that they had to offer. But they had enough to offer to improve the power output by 90 horsepower. So it was a pretty good gain from cylinder heads with the right combination. We've taken a look at the gains offered by cylinder heads and camshaft. Now we need to take a look at how much power is available by swapping out the intake manifold. And again, like with the camshaft and the cylinder heads, it depends on the combination, and also depends on the particular intake manifold that you're starting with. In our case, for the LS, This was a big test that I ran. You can take a look. I'll put a link up here. You can see it was the big cathedral port intake test, and I basically ran every intake manifold that was cathedral port at the time that I could get a hold of, and I'm showing you the starting point because we used the least powerful factory intake manifold that they had available, which was the original LS1, the OG LS1. And a lot of people think, well, what about the truck intake manifold? Does it make less? No, the truck manifold, the factory truck manifold, makes more power everywhere than the LS1. So if you're looking to upgrade your intake manifold, the only thing that's better or worse than the LS1, and this came out later, was the LS4. The front wheel drive version LS4 intake manifold is by far the worst one. But this comparison is with the LS1. So here we go. This was a 6-liter that I built up specifically for this test. It is an iron block. It had a stock crank. It had Corolla rod, CP flat top pistons. It had a comp of 54-469-11 camshaft. So it was a 617, 624 lift, 231, 247 at 50 and 113 degree lobe separation angle. We had short travel, limited travel lifters on it. We had a push rod length that was designed for this combination. It had Airflow Research LSX V2 230 heads with 58cc chambers. We ran stock rockers, 1 5/8 headers, and collector extensions and mufflers on it. And we had a Mazir electric water pump. We had the truck pan and pickup on it. We had 75-pound Holley injectors, obviously a Holley HP management system. And we started out with a factory LS1 intake manifold and a 78mm throttle body. The throttle body was chosen always to match the opening in the intake manifold. And we made with the stock LS1 intake manifold, peaked at 535 horsepower at 6,900. And 468 foot-pounds at 5,100 RPM. Here's what happened after we replaced that manifold with a fast. This was an LSXR with a 102mm throttle body. You can see we gained power basically everywhere. As I said, the LS1 before that LS4 came out was kind of the least powerful of all of the combinations. Everything was better than that. The LS2, obviously the LS3 is for a factory LS3 rec port head combination. But the early truck, the later truck, the Trailblazer SS, and then a whole slew of aftermarket manifolds. But equipped with a fast LSXR and 102mm throttle body, 590 horsepower. Peak torque was also up quite a bit. 505 foot-pounds of torque. So not only do we gain more power, but we gain more torque and we gain more power everywhere, so that we know it's a good combination. In fact, when somebody asks me what intake manifold should I use on a cathedral port application, more than 90% of the time, I tell them a fast. Now, it's going to be more expensive than a lot of other ones that you might pick. Like you might get the Trailblazer SS, which would be between these two, kind of skewed more toward the fast a little bit. But the fast is definitely worth a good bit of power, even over a Trailblazer SS. It's just that it costs, $1,000 or more to get that extra power. So you guys get to decide, is that amount of power gain worth that kind of money? And you have to decide the same thing for the camshafts and the cylinder heads, all of that stuff. But camshafts are your first choice for an LS, and then obviously cylinder heads help and intake manifolds help, and combine all three and you get a super powerful combination. I'm Richard Holdner. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff, and remember, it depends on the combination you're putting it on.